everyone. Welcome back to Paddock Project. This is our last race recap of the season, not our last episode of the season, because of course we're going to do a full season recap with the really fun superlatives survey that Tiggy always has us do and has you guys do at the end of the year. So we're going to talk about the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, talk about the F1 Academy races that happened this weekend. There's so much to talk about. I think we should just jump in. So I'm Chessa.
I'm Sarah.
And I'm Tiggy.
First off, okay, overall thoughts and takeaways. First off, in terms of an overall takeaway, we have some big breaking news from Tiggy. So Tiggy, please let us know what has happened in the last hour or so.
Literally the last 30 minutes, I still have not processed it. So for those of you who follow us on Instagram, I posted a video, a thank you to Lewis on Friday because I was just feeling very emotional. And obviously it's not the end of his career, but it's been one of the greatest team athlete partnerships in all of sports history. And obviously it's a big end of an era. So I posted this thank you video, pretty short. And after the race today, guess who comments on it? Lewis Hamilton himself. And
so insane.
Actually, I dropped my phone. And as I told you guys, I thought it was a fan account. I thought it was spam. So I had to check it 5 times because it was handle Lewis Hamilton. I was like, what fan account has the handle Lewis Hamilton? Doesn't Lewis have that handle? And then I saw the blue check mark and I was like, wait. And then I clicked on the profile and I was like, wait. And I was like, oh my God. So he said, thank you, Tiggy. I see you and I really appreciate this message. Pray hands.
The Lewis, that's just his signature emoji, the pray hands.
I don't think I'm ever going to be the same.
Absolutely wild. And what we were talking about too, he said your name and you did not mention your name in the video.
No, I didn't. I mean, people had said my name in the comments, but was this man reading the comments? I feel like his team must have flagged it to him. Obviously, this man is not. It's right after the race. He's not scrolling through reels.
Deep in the Instagram comments.
Yeah.
Oh, what I was saying, Tiki was saying, it's maybe he's getting his private jet out of Abu Dhabi and he's catching up on fan mail. He's let's see what's up. Let's see what's good.
I don't know. Whatever it is, thank you. I really, I'm not kidding. I don't think I'll ever be the same. I shed tears.
Absolutely wild turn of events here. But in another huge turn of events today, we have the first McLaren Constructors Championship victory in 26 years from 1998. They were joking on F1 TV. The McLaren drivers weren't alive. At least Oscar Piastri definitely wasn't alive. He was joking about that in his interview. It's such a massive
We were barely alive.
Team. Oh, true. Yeah, I was born in 1996, so we were 2. And wild to think, even in the Lewis McLaren era, brief though it was in the 2000s, it was still so tight. McLaren was never able to win Constructors. It's a phenomenal achievement from them. And just speaking just as evidence of how thrilling this season was, it really came down to the wire. After the first 10 minutes of the race, I was thinking, okay, we might have a real battle here. And I think it was so disappointing for Ferrari too, because they could taste it. You could hear Charles's last couple laps radio and he was just asking how far off is Carlos. I feel
so desperate.
It really gave them some hope here. But overall, I think the main takeaway is just next year is going to be amazing. Again, we had 7 different drivers win multiple races each. We had huge breakout moments for Lando, a super strong season from George, Max potentially with less of a high performance car going into next season. I think it's just going to be absolutely thrilling next year.
100%. There were just so many storylines this week. It was hard to keep up. Obviously,
tell me about it.
Lewis Hamilton's last weekend at Mercedes, that took up probably 90% of my headspace this week, but there were so many other things going on. I'm so happy for McLaren and just what an amazing season. And my heart was in my stomach on that first lap when Max and Piastri crashed. I was like, oh my God, is this what
did you all see too that Max apologized?
Good.
I feel like Max very rarely And I like that he was admitting, I don't think he was saying obviously that he did it intentionally, but that he locked up. And I think it probably would have been, he clearly kind of thinks it was a racing incident because he was saying this penalty situation has gotten kind of wild with just any type of causing a collision, getting a 10-second stop and go penalty. I think it maybe was closer to a racing incident, but I'm glad he apologized to Oscar for that.
100%, but just so well deserved for McLaren. They had no official DNFs all year. Oscar is only the fourth driver in history to complete 100% of laps in a given season, which is insane. It's like Michael Schumacher, Lewis, and one other person.
Damn, so, Oscar.
Just the consistency, and obviously Lando had an outstanding season himself as well. I just think they so deserve it, and it was amazing seeing the celebration and Zach Brown so happy and everybody in the garage and back at the factory in Woking, like all those. I love those live reaction videos of them all watching back at home, and just so exciting. Like that's what it means, you know, and like this is what it's all for. And I just think it's so cool to see that and witness that happening first time in 26 years. So that was amazing. We have a lot of stuff to talk about with drama that has come up this week and news and headlines, which I think kind of sucked some of the air out of the celebration and the bittersweet nature of some of this stuff. But I think the Max and George drama we'll obviously get to, and then Max becoming a father. I mean, I guess he's already a bonus dad in his words, but becoming a father, a biological father for this child with Kelly Piquet. So we have a lot to talk about there. And the only thing I'll just feel a little like, the only person I feel a little bad for is Carlos, because it's his last race at Ferrari, and I just feel like there was so much else going on that he didn't really get any of the attention or celebration that he deserved, I thought. And so we can talk about that a little bit more too.
Botas. Justice for Botas. I feel so strongly about this. So we have so much to talk about.
Yeah,
I think this season has been like, I feel like in every one of our last few recaps, at least, we feel like there's been some like air taken out of some people's wings or tires or whatever you want to say, like just people not getting the send off they deserve, like Ocon last race not getting sent off he deserves. It just feels like there's been so much happening that we really can't keep up, and this race was no exception. I loved this race. Like, as someone who loves a midfield battle, I feel like obviously there was a lot of excitement and like mathematical decision making happening up at the front. Like, I was watching with my dad and he would pause it every 10 seconds and like start to do the math. And I'm like, can you just wait for a second? But there was so much going on in the midfield. Like, at one point we had 6 different drivers running and 6 different teams running top 6, which was so cool to see. Like, I loved everything about this race. It was fun that there was also a lot of like DNFs and action and a safety car and things like that while still being safe. And so I'm also happy about that. And it was just honestly one of the more perfect races of the season and the best way to end it, I think. So let's talk about our MVPs and LVPs.
For me, for MVP, I think the obvious one is McLaren overall, but I think a shout out to Lando as well. My boyfriend made a really good point about how earlier in this season, Miami era, when it was his first win, Lando was still really getting used to fighting at the front, was definitely more mistake prone. And he was just saying the feeling watching Lando leading in Miami is, oh my God, don't mess up, don't mess up, don't mess up. Is he going to crash? Can he keep it together? And I wasn't even really thinking it that much. He's out front. It was so much pressure. I'm sure they must have told him on the radio about Piastri. If he had a spin and off, any type of issue, it was kind of done for if it ended up being a Ferrari 1-2, especially when he had both of the Ferraris behind him after Leclerc's amazing drive through the field. And he now, I feel like, is a seasoned enough driver at the front, which is a very different type of skill and type of pressure. And he kind of spoke about this after the race, saying, now I'm ready to fight for a championship. I thought I was, and I wasn't really in hindsight. And then now I truly am. And I agree with that. And I think this was a really full circle moment of seeing Lando being able to really deliver under that pressure. And I think he really is now truly ready for a championship battle.
And he said that on the radio at the end after the whole papaya on top thing. He was like, next year's our year and next year is my year. And I was like, wow,
I love it.
That is, that's the confidence a future world champion needs. So I totally agree with that. I think that's such a good point, that I feel a lot more confidence in Lando over the season to not make those mistakes up front, to fight at the front, to kind of keep his cool and drive a race after race that's needed to be consistent enough to win a world championship. So I think it's going to be a dogfight next year. But my MVP, there are probably no guesses as to who else I would give it to, but I have to give it to Lewis. I think obviously after quali with the Ballard and whatever the whole incident was with that ruining his quali, to drive from the back of the grid basically to P4 and just such an epic drive. And there's so much pressure, like one wrong move through all of those overtakes and moves throughout the race. Like imagine ending your final race at Mercedes in a DNF or something. So like having to drive on that line of like pushing everything to the absolute possible max limit without ruining like one of the most important moments of your career, I think was incredible. And just, I watched the last 15 to 20 minutes just from Lewis's individual driver.
Of course you did.
Helmet. Well, I wanted to hear the radios and I wanted to see all of that. So yeah, I watched it just from his perspective, and they actually had the camera flipped back on him so you could see his helmet and him talking, which I thought was so cool at the end. But
nice.
Yeah, the back and forth radio at the end there with Bono and Toto, and just the emotions and him wiping away the tears and getting out of the car, like the donuts. I just thought it was perfect. Like, would it have been great to have been a podium 100% or even a win, which was, I believe, my hot take. But
yes,
I thought it was just absolutely beautiful. So
my MVP was just like the fact that this was the drive of the race of the comeback drive. Like, you have Lewis's comeback drive, Leclerc's, I think, is my MVP. Like, that is unbelievable. And I have a question for you guys later when we talk about Ferrari specifically and then that specifically. But I loved to see that, because to me, and I wonder what you guys think is harder, like Lando's position of being out front and having such a high pressure situation on his back for a bunch of different reasons, or Tiggy, like you said, like a race where you're coming from the bottom all the way up to the top and you're constantly overtaking in all of those chances to have a mistake, have a contact, etc. I don't know what would have been harder, but that's my MVP. For LVPs, I'm going to do that radio that Max had where he called the stewards stupid idiots. I thought that was so uncalled for and so rude, because, like, one, we could debate this. Like, he kind of deserved that 10-second penalty with Oscar. He probably didn't need to make that move. Like, he's already won the championship. Like, literally, what is he doing? Making such a high-risk move. And then complaining about the 10-second penalty, joking about, oh, they might as well have just made it 20, and then calling them stupid idiots was not world championship driver radio material, in my opinion.
For me, I think I'm going to give it to Checo. I just think it's so sad it just feels representative of the season for him to DNF like that and just have such an unceremonious end to the season. And I think it's just, representative of how this season has gone, and it's unfortunate. And I've started to watch some of the superlative answers come in already, and most of you think that he is going to either retire or lose his seat next. So we'll talk about that, I'm sure, but not great.
My LVP is also Checo related. It's a little more big picture, but my LVP is Red Bull not signing Carlos when Carlos became available instead of Checo. I feel like it was a huge miss. We talked about this. I'm sure we'll talk about it more in the season recap as well, but we talked about this so much mid-season once it became clear that Checo's turn of form and kind of downturn was potentially more of a permanent situation and really starting to impact Red Bull's constructors' chances. Checo was available on the market, clearly was shopping around, and I just think that was an absolutely huge miss. I'm sure it's hard for Carlos to look at now. Maybe, who knows, there's some history at Toro Rosso with Carlos and Max and maybe not getting along the best as teammates, so we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Maybe even if the seat was completely open, it wasn't an option for Carlos, but I think it's just so disappointing now that he is in a long-term contract with another team and potentially having missed that opportunity. It's a massive missed opportunity for Red Bull, because ultimately now they're going to have to take a chance, which they don't really like doing with that number 2 seat with Max. Going to have to really take a chance on a more unproven or feisty driver, either Yuki or Leah, most likely. So that's my kind of overarching LVP. And then the other one is stake because I'm just such a Bottas fan and he deserves so much more. Talking about unceremonious exits, like he's an incredible driver, one of the best number twos of the past 10 years, tons of wins, podiums, was up there all the time with Lewis and Max on podium, like the Ham Verbot podium era. And it's really sad to see him going out on such just a down note when a lot of people aren't talking about his career and how successful he's been if this is the last F1 season he's going to have.
Totally. And some of his comments too about how he basically admitted that he made the wrong choice. Like he had Williams and Stake on the table and made the Stake decision in big part, I think, because of Fred Vasseur, who obviously left to go to Ferrari. And I think he was just like it kind of like spiraled or unraveled from there. And it's just so sad to see that. So I totally agree. Bottas deserves more.
F1 is like that. She's a fickle girl. Okay, in terms of how our hot takes held up, okay, mine were pretty decent. I had Doohan top 10. He ended P15, so didn't get that one. I had Alpine said just P6, which they did, and I had Sainz beats Charles, which he did, so I'm pretty happy.
Well done. I said McLaren would win Constructors, which was true, and then I said Lewis win, which, didn't quite get there, but had the quali incident not happened, I could have seen it.
Mine completely did not happen. I said surprise podium, but I did like that we had some surprise players like Hülkenberg fighting up there. And then also Gasly. We haven't talked about Gasly yet. And I feel like he's kind of having his breakout moment.
An absolute king.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk. He did a great job. Okay, let's jump into the race weekend. So for FP1, we had 6 rookies. We had Ryo Hirakawa for McLaren, Arthur Leclerc for Ferrari. That was the first time we've had brothers completing a practice session together. We had Isaac Hajar for Red Bull, Felipe Drugovich for Aston Martin, and Ayumu Iwasa for Red Bull, and Luke Browning for Williams. So lots of fun new names in there. For this session, we had Charles on top, then Lando and Hamilton.
All the teams were like saving their rookies to the very last race because they have to run rookies. So it's kind of funny. But we just have to give a shout out to the Leclerc brothers. I mean, what a dream, and how proud their dad would be to see that. And all the news about Charles having food poisoning beforehand, like he barely was able to get in that car. So it was just very sweet to see that, and a touching moment.
Definitely.
For FP2, McLaren looked really great here. Lando was P1, Oscar P2. And then in a fun surprise, a little foreshadowing, we had Nico Hülkenberg P3. And then FP3, another great session for McLaren, Oscar P1, followed by Lando, and then Lewis in P3. Carlos had some smoke coming from the back of his car, but managed to finish P5. And then George was frustrated about the performance of his car and finished P6.
For quali, for Q1, we had Leclerc on top. Notably, and unfortunately this didn't hold for too long, but Checo looked pretty good. He even had the fastest time for a bit before having it deleted for track limits and then reinstated. He was one of those instances of the super close calls on track limits. There were so many issues here, especially at turn 1, which is kind of an interesting place for track limits violations. And then sadly, we had Hamilton as really the big story of Q1. He was knocked out, saying, quote, "I messed that up big time," after he ran over a stray bollard that had been knocked askew by, I think, K-Mag. So for cuts, we had Albon, Joe, Hamilton, Colapinto, and Doohan.
For Q2, Sainz topped the session while his teammate's time was deleted. Charles wasn't able to get another lap in, so he was eliminated in Q2, which didn't really end up mattering that much because of his 10 place grid penalty, which we'll talk about. For Q2, Bottas also continued to look good, made it into Q3. So out we had Leclerc, Magnussen, Yuki, Liam Lawson, and Stroll.
Q3, some excitement here. So we had a bit of a tense moment in the session where Max lost the car, and then lots of excitement when Nico Hülkenberg got provisional pole. That Max save was insane, just like coming into the final straight. David Coulthard, the announcer, was like, I don't know how he saved that. I've never seen anything like it. So that was actually crazy. And then in the end, we had Lando on top, followed by Piastri for the front row lockout, which was huge for them in terms of the constructors battle. The Zach and pit wall celebration was just so it was so raw. The joy was just incredible. I loved watching that. And rounding out the top 10, we had Sainz, Hulkenberg, go Nico again, Verstappen, Gasly, Russell, Alonso, Bottas, and Checo. But then after the fact, as is wont to happen these days, we have grid penalties. So both Williams drivers were hit with 5-place grid drops after the team replaced gearbox components on both cars. And then the big news was Charles Leclerc getting that 10-place grid penalty after exceeding the energy store allocation and taking a new component, which was big blow to Ferrari's hopes of overtaking McLaren in constructors. And I hate to play the what if game, but I wonder without this penalty how it would have shaken out in the end. But that is what it is.
For the race, like we were talking about earlier, there were so many drivers doing their last races with their teams today. So from the second the cars were out on the grid, we had a lot of nice thank you messages during the formation lap from Colapinto, who thanked the team for making his longtime dream of competing in F1 come true. K-Mag, Bottas, who thanked both Sauber and Ferrari, and also from Joe. And then for the start, we had almost everyone starting on mediums, hoping to make it a one-stop race. Lando had a great start, but then, of course, the big story at turn 1 was contact between Oscar and Max. Max was throwing it up the inside. They both did big spins. Max righted himself right away, but fell back about 7 places. Oscar was fully spun off the track. He lost 17 places. He basically rejoined completely at the back. Max ended up getting a 10-second penalty for causing a collision, one of the stop and go penalties. He was late to the lunge, didn't quite give Oscar space. Like Jessica was saying earlier, it really felt unnecessary given that Max has already won the championship. There's not anything on the line for him in this race besides trying to get his zillionth podium. So it did feel a bit unnecessary. I think he ultimately kind of misjudged it and it was a mistake. I don't think he was trying to wreck Oscar or anything, but it was nice to see him take responsibility and apologize because I feel like it does make a difference when drivers do that. They can't make up for the fact that it happened, but it at least makes a difference when people take responsibility.
I totally agree on that one. For the rest of the start, Leclerc had a really good start. He made up 11 places from the back of the grid almost immediately. And then literally like right after this kerfuffle happened with Oscar and Max, and it got righted and we're like, okay, we can take a deep breath again. Then almost right away, Checo had a spin from contact with Bottas. He spun off, seemed to stop, and then the car seemed to start back up again. And then when the cameras panned back, the car had fully stopped. He was getting out of the car. It literally looked like he couldn't get out of the car fast enough. He's like, I'm out of this. I'm out of F1. Last race, I'm done. And so he had a DNF there. There was a virtual safety car enabled, and Checo DNFing so early in the race, immediately confirmed that Red Bull will get P3 in the championship. Mathematically, there was no other way. So that was unfortunate for them.
Then after the restart, which was lap 3 or 4, we had more contact, this time between Oscar and Colapinto, where Oscar clipped the back of Colapinto's car, gave him a puncture. Eventually, Colapinto DNF'd as well, which was so sad for his last race. And then lap 5, Oscar had to box, and they gave him hard tires to try and keep them for the rest of the race. And he had some very small front wing damage, but that would have been a 30-plus second pit stop, so they just left it. And then Oscar got a 10-second penalty for this incident, which he served later in the pits.
This was an exciting first stint also in the upper midfield because we had 1 point with 6 constructors running in the top 6, plus Gasly P3, Hülkenberg P5. This was a really big point and was crucial for that Alpine Haas P6 constructors battle. So very exciting to watch all around. And like we were saying, Gasly ended up coming out on top, getting that P6 for Alpine, and Gasly had just been in amazing form the last couple races. And again, that Oscar stat about not having any DNFs, Gasly, I think it was saying he was the first F1 driver in history to finish a season having caused no damage, which is also an incredible stat, just keeping it clean,
cheap driver,
saving the
incredible.
team, saving the team so much money. So go Gasly.
For the rest of the first stint heading towards the middle of the race, it started to become kind of a game of chicken between Lando and the Ferraris to see who would pit first, because obviously if you pit second, you can have the advantage of seeing what the other team did. They had been looking at Hamilton and Oscar's kind of data on the hards. they were seeing that the hards weren't necessarily the best choice, so they're trying to get those mediums to extend as long as possible. And then also at the same time, Ferrari was trying to game an undercut for Charles to pass George for P3.
For the middle stint of the race, so lap 17, 18-ish, we had some fun back and forth between Yuki and Gasly for P8. They definitely lost some time fighting each other, gave Hülkenberg time to eventually catch up and pass Yuki for P9. So that was a little exciting moment in the P6 constructors battle. And then lap 20, the Ferrari pit crew came out to try and dupe McLaren into thinking they were going to pit. I love when pit crews do this. I think this is like some of my favorite things in F1. But then they went back in, came out at lap 21 for Charles's actual pit stop for hards. But Lando at that point had built a nice 4-second gap to Sainz in P2, which was great for him to cover anything that Ferrari did for Sainz pit stop wise. And then for Sainz, he pitted lap 26 for hards right after McLaren brought Lando in for hards as well, which was such a fast stop. It was only 2 seconds, and he came out just 2 seconds ahead of Sainz, but Sainz had 1 lap on those tires, so Lando had to get his tires up to temp really fast to defend as well, which was a little fun. And then lap 31, another incident was Bottas locking up, contact with Magnussen, got a puncture, full front wing and steering damage, so he had to retire, which was just so sad.
There was so much action happening in this race. It was very hard to keep track of everything. It was very exciting.
For the final stint, this was really just about Sainz trying to make up time and potentially snag P1 from Lando, but Lando was managing the tires well, gaining time. He kept a nice 4 or 5 second buffer to Sainz. Oscar was pushing on into the points. He did almost lose the car at one point, and then the team got on the radio, told him to keep it safe since the safety car would be a total disaster for Lando. And then Sainz in P2 had a 26-second lead to George in P4. So there was a chance they could have pit him to potentially destabilize McLaren, maybe get a fastest lap, but they ended up not doing that. And then on the very last lap, we had a loss in DNF. And at the last second, Hamilton passed George for P4, which was so fun seeing Lewis make up basically a second a lap in the last 10 laps to overtake George at the end. Was very exciting.
We have to talk about that radio when Lewis was like a second or so behind George. They felt the need to get on the radio and say to George, like, please keep it clean with Lewis. And he was like, of course.
That was
imagine.
That was hilarious. I'm sure they were just trying to be extra safe, but that was so funny. George was probably kind of offended. Like,
yeah, he was like, are you
I would have been like major eye roll.
That was so funny. So in the end, we had Lando on top with Sainz and Leclerc rounding out the podium. Yannick Sinner waved the checkered flag. We are pretty big tennis fans. So that was fun to see. And then for Radio of the Week, it was, of course, Papaya on top from Lando.
Okay, so before we go team by team, let's actually do the final standings since that's relevant because this is how the season ended. So, of course, we had Max winning with 437, Lando at 374, Charles at 356, so pretty close there, Oscar 292, Carlos 290, George 245, Lewis 223, Checo 152. That was all done at the beginning of the season. Alonso with 70 and Gasly with 42. And for constructors, that was the big one this weekend. McLaren winning with 666, Ferrari with 652, Red Bull 589, Mercedes 468, and then we dropped right off to Aston Martin in 94, Alpine 65, Haas 58, so very close there. V-Carb 46, Williams 17, and Sauber 4.
Crazy. I didn't realize McLaren had the 666 number. That's, I don't know what kind of omen that is, but
that's like the devil thing, right? I just learned that actually.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about McLaren. Constructors champions, insane high pressure for Lando and the team in general. He and they executed beautifully. Just so excited for them. 26 years, as we said. So we just could not be happier. I was feeling nervous and now I'm feeling so great. But unfortunate for Oscar, he did come back strong with a P10 finish, so snagged that point. But what do we think? Are we stoked?
This makes me so excited for next season.
Same. I'm so happy. I think just the overall arc of the season and their comeback has been really the dominant story of the season. So I feel like it would have felt a bit wrong almost if they didn't win Constructors, when I think they really deserved it. And just looking at the season as a whole, they were the best team in terms of both car and driver lineup. It really just is incredible to look at their turnaround from Bahrain last year, just being absolutely nowhere. And we got to see in Austria last year when they first brought really big upgrades and started to make some progress in 2023, and then all the way to being Constructors champions is amazing. And I feel like also gives a lot of hope to other teams who are trying to have a similar kind of arc from struggling midfield to the top. And I'm also so excited to see what Oscar can do, because yes, it kind of seems like Lando is the number one driver right now, but Lando has years and years and years of experience more than Oscar. And Oscar, I think, will really bring the fight to him next season.
Yeah, that's my main question, which I'm sure we'll talk about a lot in our season recap. But I wonder if Papaya Rules doesn't exist for at least most of the season until there's like a very clear number one. But yeah, I think that's going to be a clean slate, and it's going to be very interesting to see Lando and Oscar kind of duke it out, because we reset the clock and everything's on the table.
I cannot wait to see what happens. Okay, so for Red Bull, like Tiggy alluded to, there was a lot of news heading into the weekend. So let's cover the news first, then we can talk about the race. So first, he announced he's expecting a baby with longtime girlfriend Kelly Piquet, which is so exciting. And we went back and like did the math in our heads, and we had met her and seen her at that Clarence party that we were at in Austin, and we were like, she was drinking mocktails, she wasn't drinking alcohol. So we we felt excited about that, and it's so exciting for them. Like, Max is such a cool guy. Like he said about Penelope, he's her bonus dad, so it'll be nice to see them welcome a child of their own. And in second news, or other news items, there seems to be a full-on feud with George and Max that kind of came to a head right before the race started, or right before the weekend started, basically starting from comments at the Qatar GP. So here's what went down. Last weekend, Max got a one-place grid penalty that dropped him to P2 behind George, which was for blocking George during quali. After that race, in interviews, Max called George out and said, quote, he acts decent in front of the camera here, but when you talk to him personally, he's a different person. I can't stand that. In that case, you better F off. So that set tensions ready to go. And then in media this week on Thursday, George said that Max had actually threatened to physically hurt him during the race once they left the storage room. So there was a lot more to that than just what Max had said. And George said, quote, I find it all quite ironic seeing a Saturday night. He said he was going to purposely go out of his way to crash into me and put my effing head in the wall. So tensions were very, very high heading into this race weekend. After one, I'm very happy that nothing happened, and hopefully they can just water under the bridge until next season.
Another thing that George said was that if it was Max who had been in Lewis's position in Abu Dhabi 2021, Michael Masi would be fearing for his life, which it's quite a strong statement.
That's a name we haven't heard in a while too.
It's an unlikely, in my mind, duo to be feuding, because I just feel like they haven't historically had that much beef with each other, but they're such different people that I guess it does kind of make sense. Like, yeah, they could not be more different, I feel like. But it just, I don't know. I'm actually kind of surprised that George took it to the same level that Max did, just given this is Lewis's last week and there's a lot of stuff going on. I don't know if I would say that George didn't take the high road on this, but I guess I'm surprised that George kind of was swinging at the same level that Max was. I kind of expect that from Max. I don't necessarily expect that from George, which was interesting to see.
And I guess that's kind of part of Max's point, is he's saying, I do feel like Max is super blunt, including in his public statements, which is presumably also what he is saying privately. And I think his point, which is interesting, I haven't thought about this a lot, is a lot of times in an incident, both drivers are called into the stewards and are kind of making their case. And so his point was kind of that George was being, allegedly, from Max's telling, super aggressive, pushing for Max to get a penalty when George wasn't on a flying lap. It was kind of a wild penalty to begin with, and then going out and probably being in his George way, super diplomatic to the cameras.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because it probably happens a lot when you think of drivers in the stewards room, and they're probably saying one thing in there and then kind of going out into the media pen and maybe saying something different.
But it's also hypocritical, as we talked about in the Qatar GP recap. Like, Max was doing the exact same thing to Lando about not slowing down under the yellow on the straight. Like, he was just going after Lando, trying to get this penalty. So like, that felt a little hypocritical to me. I guess it's just like he takes issue with the fact that he thinks George says one thing to someone and another thing to another. But
that's what it felt like.
It just felt like a weird distraction for all the important things that were going on this week.
It was an odd way to start this race weekend for sure. And just to wrap up Red Bull, so Max ended up finishing P6. He served his penalty, and then he did do a good job navigating that pretty chaotic race start, so not terrible. And then, I mean, there's just not much more to say about Checo anymore, but really tough race, really tough way to end a really difficult season after that DNF. So kind of bummer for him all around.
I think maybe let's save this for the season recap, but I feel like one thing I'm definitely thinking a lot about, and we posted a poll on this, and a lot of you all have thoughts on it too, is a Max retirement coming sooner rather than later? Maybe let's
I'm just going to say, halfway through the season, my hot take was that Max was going to retire in 2026 if he's not in a good car for the change of the regulations. He's out of there, and I feel like the news this week kind of makes me double down on that thought.
Yeah.
Like, with a child, with Zandvoort being taken off the calendar after 2026, that's his home race. Like, it just feels like there's a confluence of factors. And Max himself saying, like, he doesn't like the 24 race calendar. He doesn't want to be racing when he's 40. Like, all these comments, I just feel like he'll be there for next season. I think there's no doubt about that. And I do think he'll give it his best shot 2026. But I think after that, he might be out of here.
Okay, Tiggy, I agree with you, and we can argue this more in the season recap, but he was saying all that when he was winning, like really winning and not struggling and being bored at the front. So things could definitely change next year, and he might have that hunger for a fight reignited in him. So we'll have to see.
For Ferrari, it was just a sad day for the team after falling short in the Constructors battle. Like we were saying, I think it seemed even more disappointing because it was almost so close they could taste it at one point, and they were definitely just so disappointed after. But like Chessa was saying with her MVP, Leclerc's charge from the back of the grid was one of the standout performances of the race, really one of his best drives of the season. It put him up there in my book with Lewis and Max of having that ability to be in a situation where you're P17 to P20 and driving to a podium is something that it's really kind of a world champion level talent. It's the type of thing we see from Max and Lewis. So that was super impressive. And then definitely some funny radio. I think, Chessa, you had liked one of these.
Yeah, it was just funny because it was like he was doing so hard. Like you said, he was pushing, making a lot of overtakes, and gaining all those positions. And like with 10 laps to go, they go on his radio and they're like, okay, Charles, let's try to get into the rhythm here. And he's like, what rhythm? This is the rhythm. I've been doing the rhythm the whole race. And I thought that was funny, but you can definitely tell because then he had like a series of radios after where he's like, how close is Sainz to Lando, like what's happening, and you could tell he was like getting more and more defeated each time. But like Tiggy, like you said earlier, like it's a weird game to play, but personally, if it hadn't been for the grid penalty, do you think Ferrari could have taken the win? And Constructors, I want to say like yes, if everything that had happened this race had happened and Matt and Charles had started earlier, but it didn't. Like today was such a sort of like a random game, and there were so many things that happened that just like changing this one thing, I don't know if could get you to predict if Ferrari could have taken it or not.
Yeah, I was just going to say that you could play that what if game with so many things. Like McLaren did have the front row lockout. So if Oscar hadn't had that incident with Max at the beginning, like they could have just been even stronger. And so it's hard to play the what if game, but I do think that 10 place grid penalty set Ferrari on the back foot. That said, I do feel like there's something about these drivers who are incredible and start from the back of the pack. It just turns on this X factor that they like charge through the field. We saw it with Lewis. We saw it with Charles this race. Like, I wonder if you start from P2 or P3 or P4 or whatever, you have that same hunger or even pull. Like, I do feel like there's something about feeling like all the odds are against you that just make them drive in the way that they did. And so I think there's something to be said for that.
Totally agree.
All right. For Mercedes, just exceptional race for the team, honestly. It wasn't a 1-2, wasn't even a podium, of course, but just watching the recovery drive for Lewis, he's had 3 Q1 knockouts in his last 6 races with the team. So to go from P16 to P4 on this final race was amazing. And on the grid to finish 4th in his final race for Mercedes. Absolutely loved the donuts. That was so fun. And then George, he did pretty good to finish P5. Didn't do great after his pit stop. Definitely lost some ground. But it was fun to see them kind of really close to each other and battle it out a bit at the end there and have Lewis come out on top, because George still won in drivers, and George really did outperform in quali kind of almost, I think it was like 19 races of the 24 this season. So George has a lot to be proud of, but I'm happy that Lewis got his moment.
For Aston Martin, decent race for Alonso. He finished in P9. He had a consistent sort of midfield battle throughout the race, so he did a good job hanging in there. For Stroll, not kind of the same story. Difficult weekend. He finished P14 with no points. It kind of just feels like they didn't have any big moments or anything to really give them the impact they needed to make an impact this weekend for their race. But they were kind of in no man's land for constructors anyway, so it wasn't super high stakes for them.
For VCARB, it was a tough start for Yuki. He kept losing the clutch. He was in anti-stall mode off the start, lost a lot of places, and he had some good wheel-to-wheel action throughout the race, but only managed a P12 finish. And then for Liam, he had a tough race, first with the pit stop where they had a loose front left. He had to repit, then had a DNF with engine issues. But again, this will be a big topic in our season recap, so look out for that. All signs seem to be pointing towards Liam being Checo's replacement and not Yuki. So definitely stay tuned on that front.
Yes. For Haas, bit of mixed results for the team since they weren't able to score enough points to take away P6 from Alpine. K-Mag's P14 start was the team's best start at this race since 2019, but he ended the race and his last with the team with a P16 finish. And Nico Hülkenberg finished 8th, which was great to get some points, but like we said, not enough for the constructors battle. But I think Nico should feel really good about himself going into next season. And I think Audi and Sauber should be feeling good about their choice in him. I think at the time, I remember people feeling like it was a little random and kind of just like, obviously there's the German factor, but I really do think Nico has something special and has a lot to offer if he's in a good car.
Yeah, me too. For Alpine, great weekend for the team and definitely an exciting one for Doohan after he replaced Ocon for that final race. So Gasly had Alpine's high start at this race since 2012, and his P7 finish was absolutely incredible and very, very important to help the team secure that contentious P6 in the constructors standings. Made a lot of money there, so happy for him and the team. And Jack Doohan made his F1 debut. I think P15 is not a bad way to end the race, although there were a few DNFs, but exciting for him to make an early debut as he gets ready for a full season with the team next year.
And for Williams, this race was a bit of a struggle for the team with both drivers having grid penalties to start. Alex Albon finished P11, just missing out on points, but he did have a solid performance, got lucky after being noted for a false start, but didn't receive a penalty. And we talked about Colapinto's retirement due to damage after his collision with Piastri, which is so tough for him since it looks like he won't be in F1 next year. Obviously, we never know what could or will happen, but it's not looking like there are a lot of open seats at the moment. And his kind of farewell message to the team and thank you was very touching and sweet as well. And lastly, for Stake, tough end to a tough season for both drivers. Joe noted for a false start and got a 5-second penalty, ended up in P13. And for Bottas, he had to retire early after his puncture, which was also a disappointing end, especially after his getting into Q3 for quali and really wanting him to get points this season. Such a bummer, but c'est la vie. What's next?
What's next indeed. So there was so much that happened this race weekend. Again, we'll talk a lot more about things on our season recap, but to end this episode, we'll give you all a quick little F1 Academy recap because they had a very, very exciting weekend. So to set the stage, we had the Drivers' Championship decided last weekend with Abby Pulling taking the title, but then since the second race of last weekend was canceled and then they added another one this weekend. That meant that her 83-point lead over Dorian Pont was actually not enough to mathematically be certain of the title, since there were actually 84 points available for grab this weekend. So that was definitely one thing to think about. And then we also still had a battle amongst the teams heading into the weekend. And it was also the home race for the Alcobacy sisters.
For FP1, so for this practice session, we had Chloe Chambers come out on top, followed by Abby Pulling and Dorian Pain. Quali, Abby Pulling dominated with a triple pole position because of those 3 races. So these pole positions got her the extra points she needed to close the championship gap. So she was recrowned champion, which was funny, but very fun for her. And then Chloe Chambers and Hamda Al-Kubaisi also looked amazing, with Chloe securing P2 for all 3 races, and home crowd favorite Hamda qualified P3 for race 1 and race 2.
For race 1, it was amazing. Abby pulled a win here, followed by Hamda Al-Kubaisi, who maintained P2, and then Dorian Pond was able to gain 2 places to podium in P3. And for race 2, Abby Pulling secured her second win of the weekend here after a very close fight with Chloe Chambers, where she was able to take back P1 after actually losing it to Chloe at the start. So great on Abby there. And then again, exciting for Hamda, who got back-to-back P3 podium finishes.
Race 3 was super exciting. This was such a fun one to watch. So Maya Vug claimed her maiden F1 Academy victory after taking the lead midway through, holding off a late safety car restart. And her win helped the team Prema clinch the team's title for the second consecutive year. So very exciting for them. And we had Abby Pulling finishing second and Nerea Marti P3, her first podium since Zandvoort. And there was this very touching video of Abby and Nerea kind of hugging, and there were some tears being shed, and it was very sweet to see these ladies finish off on another incredible season at F1 Academy. And as a reminder, so the drivers who have driven 2 seasons with F1 Academy cannot return. You can only drive 2 seasons. So some of these drivers we're saying goodbye to, and they're on to greater things.
And with that, thank you all for listening to our last race recap of the season. We'll be back very soon next week with our season recap and all of our thoughts heading into next year. Thanks, everyone.
And please, reminder to fill out the superlative survey. We'll link it in the description. So we always love seeing your thoughts.